MotoGP's Aero revolution is over a decade old at this point, and yet still, something new aerodynamic pops up on the bikes every year that makes the whole paddock go, whoa. Now, sometimes it's something that we've never seen before, but in this case, a passing familiarity with Formula One aerodynamics, which at the race we do have, has enabled us to go, hey, wait a second. Is this the F-duct? Our MotoGP correspondent Simon Patterson is on location at Thailand right now ahead of the season opener, and he's been digging into this exact question.
When MotoGP first started its current experimentation with aerodynamics, some 10 to 15 years ago now, what we originally saw was something that was kind of crudely inspired by Formula One, but as time has gone on and as complexity has increased, those two things have diverged. However, as we go into the 2026 season here in Buriram in Thailand, the team behind me, Aprilia, are doing something that is completely out of the old school Formula One playbook to bring something new to the MotoGP paddock that's never been done before, and very, very carefully and very intelligently skirts the MotoGP rulebook to give them a really significant advantage this season. Now, before we go into what Aprilia have done for this year that is so clever, I think first of all we have to visit a little bit the history of aerodynamics in MotoGP. Up until kind of 2015 and the real arrival of technical mastermind Gigi Dall'Igna at Ducati, we hadn't seen much in the way of innovation, but once he got into the Italian brand and started experimenting, we saw big changes happen very quickly. First of all, and most visibly with the big front wings on the front of the bike around 2014, 2015, 2016, they were all designed to increase the ability of the bike to keep the nose on the ground, to reduce that wheelie and corner exit, to give them as much of an advantage as they could on acceleration and on drive, and to really capitalize on the big strength of the Ducati motor at the time, which was by far the fastest bike in the paddock. But as time has gone on, that has changed a little bit, and really it's been Aprilia the last few years who've been the real innovators in terms of aero and MotoGP. Starting in 2022, whenever they took a brand new look at the way that the side fairings of MotoGP bikes work, and essentially managed to create a new system that gives ground effect through corners. Think of it like the floor of a Formula One car that keeps the car sucked to the ground. Well, whenever the MotoGP bike now is at that kind of extreme 60-degree lean angle that we see, they affect the shape of the fairings on the side of the bike, help the rider turn, give them greater corner speed, and give them a really significant advantage. Since Aprilia first brought that ground effect fairing some 3 or 4 years ago, it's become kind of de rigueur now, with a lot of the other factories copying in various ways to try and create a similar effect. But there's one big negative to what Aprilia and all the others are doing, and that's that by creating those big panels on the side of the bike designed to give more corner speed, you're also creating drag. The wings on the side of the bike slow them down in the start-finish straights, and teams have been looking for a way to try and find a compromise, a balance between having too much drag and not giving enough of that ground effect to give the benefit that they're desiring. So, what is it for 2026 that Aprilia has done that's so smart? Well, it's simple. They've managed to create active aero, essentially, like Formula One cars do with the moving rear wing under the DRS system. Aprilia have found a way to control the flow of air around the bike and to switch it on and off almost at demand, despite the fact that the current MotoGP rulebook says that to do such a thing is illegal. So how did they do it? Well, we spotted back at the Sepang test 2 new vents on the front of the bike, in front of the RSGP machine, that clearly feed into 2 channels that duct around the side of the front fairing and exit just below the rider's elbows. Those channels have a lip on them, something that's clearly designed to be plugged by the rider's forearms, because the rules say that while you're not allowed moving aero parts, it doesn't say anything about what the rider can and can't do. So in normal circumstances, whenever the rider's just riding the bike, what those vents are doing is just circulating air through, and actually there's probably a little bit of a side effect there in that it helps cool the rider down in the process, and we know that overheating is something that Aprilia's had a particular problem with over the years. But whenever they're on the straight, whenever the rider's in that tucked in position with their forearms in that vent, it closes the channel. It redirects the airflow not up around the rider, but downwards inside those wings, those ground effect creating wings on the side of the bike, creates a positive pressure inside them and essentially deactivates them, reducing the drag and meaning that the effect that it has on top speed in the straights is significantly negated. If you're an F1 fan from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you will absolutely recognize it, because essentially they've taken the concept of McLaren's F-duct, the system that took an air feed from the front of the car through the cockpit, allowed the driver of the car to deactivate by plugging the hole with their elbow or their knee, and redirecting the air onto the rear wing to switch it off. Aprilia are doing exactly the same thing. They're doing it completely within the MotoGP rulebook, and from what we understand, it's something that's having a really significant effect on their top speed performance. Something that in pre-season testing here at Buriram with its big long straights was absolutely confirmed by the speed trap times. So why exactly is what Aprilia have done here so clever? Well, it's simple, because it is simple. You have no moving parts beyond the rider. You have no real grounds for this to be stopped on safety grounds like the McLaren F-duct was back in the days, because the FIA claimed back then that forcing the driver to move body parts around inside the cockpit was safety because it was distracting them from what they were doing driving the car. But the most crucial thing here is, of course, that on a MotoGP bike, the rider is moving around all the time anyway. So it's just a natural part of the process. And you could easily say that the action of resting their forearms on a part of the bike that they would normally rest them on is probably much less of a safety concern than, say, moving around in the bike to try and activate the ride height device that lock the front and rear suspension for the start of the race. They've also done it with very, very careful timing. We didn't see this component on the bike at the Valencia post-season test back in November. We only saw it for the very first time in Sepang just a few weeks ago. And then we saw it tested fully here at Buriram just ahead of the first round of the championship. Crucially, at a point in the year right before all of the manufacturers have to homologate their Aero package. So even if another manufacturer had spotted this in the last few weeks and thought that's really clever, like it is, and thought about trying to copy it, they simply don't have the time, because we're already into that point in the year whenever fairings need to be homologated, things are locked down, and there's just no time to do it. Aprilia have played an absolute blinder here, and it's something that in theory should absolutely pay off in a year where they're maybe closer than they've ever been before to the top bikes in MotoGP. There's a strong argument that Marco Bezzecchi starts this season second or third favourite for the championship, behind only Marc Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia, and the factory Ducati machines. But every little advantage that they can eke out of the bike is going to make life a little bit harder for their fellow Italian machines. Now, of course, it goes without saying that the other manufacturers aren't just going to let Aprilia run away with this advantage, and we know that others have been working over the winter to try and utilise as much top speed as they can out of the currently frozen engine specification ahead of next year's big rule changes in MotoGP. The engines that most of the teams, apart from those with concession status, are using this season are exactly the same as the one that they homologated and locked down at the start of last year. But Ducati, using all of their aero knowledge, all of the stuff that we know that they've been doing for the longest time, have found a way to find some performance advantages of their own by applying all of that technology to the airbox and how the bike feeds air from the front of the nose in through the engine. And they claim they've found a few extra kilometers an hour there too. So while Aprilia might have found a significant advantage to take into the new season, it's not one that's going to let them completely run away with the year, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this all pans out whenever we start racing proper this weekend.
We do not know yet if there are going to be any legality challenges to the system. We do not know yet if any of Aprilia's rival manufacturers will ask the powers that be to take a look. What we do know is that if they want to copy this, they can, as per the regulations. At least the rules allow them to do so. Now, there is an Aero homologation system, as mentioned by Simon, but you are allowed a single Aero update within the season, within the Aero boxes as prescribed by the regulations. You are allowed to refresh your Aero arrangement once. But that is a very valuable slot. That is a slot that you can't really afford not to get right. And also this season, there's an added question of how practical it could be. MotoGP's 2027 regulations are on the horizon. 850cc bikes running on Pirelli tires, not Michelin, so that's going to be quite different, with a narrower aero prescription, which means that aerodynamic influence is supposed to be reduced, but it is clear to everybody it will still have a major effect. So with all of that coming up, the expectation within the paddock for most manufacturers is that by the end of spring, start of summer, there is not going to be any 2026 relevant work done. So can anybody really afford to try to fast track any sort of copying in the paddock? I guess we'll have to find out, and that will depend on how effective the system is. Right now, we don't know. What we do know is that Aprilia has had a very, very, very good preseason, particularly at Buriram over the 2 days of testing at the track, which is about to host the season opener. Aprilia was 1-2 on the times. Aprilia had the fastest race simulation. Aprilia had the fastest sprint simulation. Marc Marquez and Ducati are still the championship favorites, but a challenge is likeliest to come from Aprilia and its new lead rider, Marco Bezzecchi, who has been committed to a new long-term deal. So not only is this an interesting technical new addition, potential F-duct in MotoGP, but it also could have a tangible effect on a title battle that a few months ago, none of us expected.